Alright guys, welcome back to the second video blog of the season. We're going to be talking this week about the power rankings through 3 weeks. I am going to keep this video shorter, hopefully, than the last one. I know it was a little too long for some of your likings, so I'll try to be a little more brief here. What I'll do for this video, I'll give you the new power rankings. I'll talk about the matchups from this past week, highlights and the lowlights of them. I'll preview next week's matches and give you some picks, and that'll be it. So just a quick announcement. I posted in the group message, but the trade deadline was set for November 20th. That is before week 12. So the last 2 weeks of the regular season for our league play will be played with no trades. Um, so yeah, I just wanted to comment also on the dynamic of the league, the way it's shaping up. I know it's only been 3 weeks, but I think it's really interesting. There's three kind of distinct tiers already in the standings. There's three teams that are 3-0 that are already starting to separate themselves, and then it drops off. There's five teams with only one win. That middle of the pack looks really wide open. And the bottom tier, there's two teams that have 0 wins. One of them being Ryan Bush's team, Richard Incognito, who is not 0-3. They're 0-2-1. We'll talk about that tie in a little bit. So let's get into the power rankings. Coming in at number 10, last place for, I think, third straight week. No, is that right? Let me check last week's rankings. Well, at least the second straight week. Pavlov's Nilman, owned by Ari Nil. He had his week 3 match against the team formerly known as Extra Ball, now Fat Bastard Multi Ball, which, for those of you who don't know, is a pinball reference to the Austin Powers pinball machine that Robbie has in his house. Rob came out guns blazing on Thursday Night Football in the Falcons game. Matt Ryan and Julio Jones hooked up for 90 combined points, and Rob just never looked back after that. It was pretty much all said and done at that point. It was just a formality. Nick Foles put up a really good effort for Ari. He was his top scorer. He did put up 56 points, but other than that, Ari had six guys score in single digits, and that's not gonna win you any fantasy matchups. And Rob's defense, the Panthers D, tried as hard as they could to give the game away on Sunday Night Football, just really playing horrible against the Steelers. They got -7. Um, and Rob also started Matt Forte, which it's very rare that you will ever see a running back get negative points, but Rob only had a 2 point lead going into Monday Night Football when the Bears played the Jets. So if something disastrous had happened, I think we all would have looked back on that as, uh, you know, just a nuclear error by Robbie. But he got lucky, and well, he didn't really get lucky, but Forte did what he had to do. He scored like 15 points, and it didn't end up mattering. He handed Ari his third loss. Ari moved to 0-3 on the season. And one of the things that we talked about last week with Ari was his tight end problem. And I was with Ari this weekend. We were hanging out at his house watching the pregame for all the games, and he's telling me, oh, I solved my tight end problem. I dropped Eric Ebron. I picked up Zach Miller. I finally solved my tight end problem. And I'm like, okay, okay. And what does Miller go and do? He goes and gets like two catches for 11 yards or something like that. Gets 3 points. So Ari, I think you still need to maybe trade for a tight end rather than venture out onto the waiver wire. It's a dangerous place for tight ends. Um, so yeah, he's 0-3. He has the second least points in the league. I think he's the clear last place guy right now. Moving to number 9, we have Surrey Medical, the team formerly known as Peterson's Daycare. This is a great name, very appropriate. 7 rostered players were on last week's injury report. Some of them did play, but they were on the injury report. They were listed as questionable or probable. Some still ended up playing. But when you got 7 guys that are hurt, it's never a good thing for a team. His three running backs, Jamal Charles, Mark Ingram, and Doug Martin, all sat out week three. Um, Although John did decide to start Jamal Charles, even though I'm fairly certain he was already. I know he played at 4 o'clock, but I'm fairly certain he was already ruled out of that game early on. Surprised you decided to start him there. Could have started Forsett, who plays for the Ravens, but what are you gonna do? In his match in Week 3 against Donald Trump's Dollar Bills, John actually, worse than nil, had seven guys, not six, but seven guys scoring the single digits, which is just horrible performances by those guys. And five of those seven guys scored the following: 0, 1, 1, 1, and 3. Possibly some of the, I mean, truthfully, yeah, they are the worst numbers I think I've ever seen from a fantasy team. John put up 86 points this week, which I think will probably be in the running for lowest points in any given week this season. And that's not a shot at you, John. That's just your team just did not perform at all. Um, on the other hand, for Donald Trump's dollar bills, Peyton Manning and Antonio Brown combined almost beat John's entire team. The two of them scored 83 points between the two of them to John's 86. And those guys were really the strength of Jay's team this week, and I expect them to be the strength of the team all season, really. Luckily for John, Jamal Charles and Doug Martin are expected to come back this week, and that's probably the best news John's heard in a while, because at 1-2 he really just needs some, and all those injuries, he just needs something to look forward to at this point. Next, coming in at number 8, my team, the East Dillon Lions. Um, Really, I am just not pleased with my squad at all so far this season. In my Week 3 match against Armed Rodgery, my top scorer was Andy Dalton with 26 points. And when your quarterback is scoring in the 20s and that's your top scorer, not going to win matches like that. None of my guys really seem to hit their projections. Everyone just seemed to underperform. And I'm super weak at the running back position. I've got Chris Johnson, Bernard Pierce, and Steven Jackson battling for my second running back spot, which is three guys who probably shouldn't even be starting on anyone's team at all, but that's really how weak I am. I've been talking to a bunch of you guys about trading for a better running back. None of you seem to be interested. No one, I've really tried to. My selling point has been Victor Cruz, and nobody seems to see the value. Even though Eli sucks, Cruz showed his big play potential this week. He had 21 points. He had like a 60-something yard grab. He had a 26-yard touchdown. But my critics will argue, and I spoke to Robbie Forbes, who argues, quote, "I'm very down on Cruz. I rode that ride last year and see this past weekend as a blip, not a trend." I guess a lot of people feel that way. They think this is just kind of a fluke, but I really don't think that's the case. I think he's going to be strong the rest of the season, and I hope somebody will take that into consideration. Maybe take him in a trade for a running back, but if not, oh well. So back to the matchup. Larry Fitzgerald was a huge disappointment. They didn't even throw to him. I watched that whole game, the Cardinals 49ers. They didn't even throw to him till the fourth quarter. And I even caught Aaron Rodgers on a bad week for Laurie. He had 27, and my quarterback had 26. Rodgers is a guy who's putting up 50 consistently. So if there was ever a week to beat this team, it would have been this week. But no one else really stepped up on my team. But you know what? The consistency of Laurie's team was incredible. She had 8 of her 10 guys in double digits. And I think consistency across the board really won it for her this week, handing me the loss, dropping me to 1-2. Coming in at number 7 in the rankings is Richard Incognito. Yeah, Ryan, the name change does not seem to have helped, as you said that you had figured it would. I feel like Ace will argue, however, that the name change did lead to last week's tie with Sam Hudson. And if for those of you who don't know, because of the stat corrections that come in usually on Tuesdays or Wednesdays after the weeks are done, um, it just so happened that after they were corrected, that those two teams had the same amount of points, and it led to a tie, which is really just doesn't happen a lot in fantasy football. So I think that's going to set up really interesting once we get down the stretch when these teams are trying to make the playoffs. I think Ryan will also argue that he should be number three or something like that in the power rankings. I'm sure he'll be like top four in his power rankings because he is delusional, I guess. I don't know. He's got more points scored than some of the teams ranked higher than him, but he doesn't have any wins, and that's what it really comes down to. You got to win football games. You play to win the game. Herm Edwards once said that. Um, the name change certainly didn't work this week against Horton. Here's a ha, formerly Mendenhall Richarded, captained by Jordan Benzing. You got to give credit though to Ryan. His team did look good this week. They only lost by 6 points. Drew Brees led the team. He had 48 points. This is Brees' third straight week in the 40s, scoring in the 40s. He had 8 guys scoring double digits, with his ninth guy scoring 9 points. So he was really consistent with scoring. But Jordan just won it. He had a weird week. He really relied on big, huge numbers from some guys to get the win. Andrew Luck fucked up the Jaguars for like 66 points, I think. I don't have it written down. I think it was 66. And Pierre Garcon got 30. He was actually thrown to by Kirk Cousins, which was sort of a shocker. So those two guys got almost 100 points. I mean, that's really what won it for Jordan, I feel like. A furious effort by Martellus Bennett and Chris Ivory on Monday Night Football, trying to claw their way back into the fantasy matchup for Ryan, and they almost did it, but they were thwarted. They were shot down by and fended off by Alshon Jeffrey's 19 points, giving Binth the win, knocking Ace to an 0-2-1 start this season. Despite Jordan having 5 guys on his team with 6 points or less, you don't see teams winning doing that very often. Ryan's record in his career in September is now 0-6-1, still winless, and he's got one more shot this week against myself to avoid 0-7-1. Number 6 in the power rankings, we just talked about him. Horton, here's a ha, captained by Jordan Benzing. This was his first win of the season over Ryan, bringing him to 1-2 and bringing him to number 6 in the rankings. The number 5 and number 4 teams in this week's rankings squared off this past week. Number 5 being Beats by Ray, Steve Walton's team, and number 4 being Jordan Cam's Slam Piece, formerly known as Aiming for Last. That's a great name by Sam. I'm very impressed with that. It's pretty funny. Really a below average week for the defending champ, and a solid week from the league rookie in Sam. Steve's squad was highlighted by Russell Wilson and Marshawn Lynch, who combined for 74 points. But the rest of the squad did not do enough to give Steve's team a real shot at winning this week. And if you take a look at Sam's top 8 guys this week, they scored the following: 11, 14, 18, 18, 21, 22, 25, and 26. I mean, this is similar to the type of week that Laurie had this week. Just crazy consistency. And to me, that just symbolizes a really strong team. And, it's tough to beat a team when everybody's scoring. Your team averaging is like over 20 points a guy, or close to 20 points a guy. It's not easy to beat a team like that, and I'm excluding kickers and defenses from that. But it's just tough to beat a team when they're scoring that many points. Her team had 46 receptions for 441 yards. That's just crazy numbers. Really good receiving week for her team. I thought that was an interesting stat. And so after this week, Beats by Ray is 1-2, and Jordan Cam's Slam Piece are 1-1-1. Now we move on to the undefeateds. All three of the following teams are 3-0. Coming in at number three, we already talked about him, Donald Trump's dollar bills. The power couple has some company at 3-0. Jay, do you still think you're overrated because you have the third most points in the league? You're 3-0. I think number three in the power rankings suits you perfectly. I think that's exactly where you belong, and that's where I have you. And then number two, again, second straight week, Armed Rodgery, Lori Bush, and number one is Fat Bastard Multi Ball, formerly Extra Ball, Robbie Forbes. I already discussed their matchups, but it's important to note that Lori's only 4 points behind Robbie this week, or after this week, and that's really the only thing separating them at this point in time. Two very strong teams. Um, yeah, and they sit 2-1 respectively, Rodgery and Multi Ball. All right, let's move on to some previews for week four, and then I'll leave you all alone. First matchup of the week is the East Dillon Lions at Richard Incognito. I have 6 players on a bye week this week, so I'm incredibly shorthanded. My team looks weaker than ever. If there's ever a week that Ryan were to end his September winless drought, this would be the week to do it. And I'm going to pick him in this matchup to beat me. As much as I don't want that, I don't see any possible way, unless a miracle happens, for me to beat Ryan. So I'm going to pick Richard Incognito. Beats by Ray versus Horton. It's a battle of two 1-2 teams. I think I'm gonna go with Jordan Horton in this situation. I'm gonna pick Horton to take down the defending champ, knock him to 1-3. The next matchup is Donald Trump's Dollar Bills and Armed Rodgery. It's the battle of two undefeated teams. I think this is the match of the week here, and I think that the winner could definitely become the new number one team in the power rankings after this week. It'll depend on what happens in Robbie's match, but the winner here could certainly end up number one. Trump, it's very interesting because the Dollar Bills are without Peyton Manning and Julius Thomas, who's a combo that we know Jay's going to be relying on all season, especially Peyton Manning as a quarterback. He's going to be relying on him for a lot of points. But Lori has Michael Floyd and Brian Quick on bye weeks, and also has Eric Decker and Roddy White currently slotted to start in their places, and those guys are both listed as questionable coming into this week. So buys and injuries, for a really desperate wide receiving core right now for Lori, I think is really going to hurt her, and that's going to really put her at a disadvantage. I still think this is kind of a toss-up because of those, without Manning and then without those receivers, but I think I'm going to have to pick the Dollar Bills to pull it off in this one. Geno Smith is the backup quarterback for the Dollar Bills. He's no Manning, but he's been okay fantasy-wise. He's been scoring in the 30s, so, I just think the wide receiver desperation on Lori's end is going to end up costing her at the end of the week. Next matchup is Surrey Medical versus Fat Bastard Multi-Ball. With Doug Martin and Jamal Charles coming back this week, I think that John's actually going to put up a fight against Robbie. I do, however, think that fight will fall just short, and I'm going to have to go with Multi-Ball to maintain his undefeated record and win this matchup. And the final match of the week is Jordan Cam's Slam Piece versus the Nilman. Nil has no Demaryius Thomas. He doesn't have the Bengals D this week. They're on bye. Vincent Jackson is hurt. And Nil just, has shown no reason for me to pick him in this matchup. So I'm going to have to go with Cam's Slam Piece. And that'll do it. We're under 20 minutes, so congratulations to me for keeping this one short. I hope you guys enjoyed. Give me some feedback. Let me know what's up, what you think about what I said. Give me some topics to talk about in the future. And I hope you enjoy. Go Bills. Peace, Nuggets.